Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. From time to time, we have special guests on our podcast to talk to us about, issues that, they really have dedicated their lives to, problems across the state that they're trying to solve. And today with us, we have Amy Hovey. She is the CEO and Executive Director for MSHDA, and she's going to talk to us about all of the things that have been happening over at MSHDA and how that affects our counties across the state. So, Amy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. So, over the past several years, we've, been told all about the housing crisis across the state, whether it's low income housing, middle income housing, just sort of the age of the housing that we have, the lack of affordability. Now, at MSHDA, you've spent a significant amount of time tackling these problems. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about, kind of what's going on over there and the things that you're tackling?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to share what's happening at MSHDA. As you mentioned, we are in a big housing crisis still in our state. We're about 190,000 units short of where we need to be, primarily because our household size has shrunk in our state. So it was, just over four people per household, and now it's only at 2 people per household. So even though we aren't having a lot of population growth in our state, we still have a housing crisis because of that. And we've been doing a lot of things to address the shortage of housing over the last few years. In fact, we've been very lucky that the administration and the legislature has been very supportive of the housing efforts. In fact, for the first time really ever, we've got state appropriations to create new programs to work with stakeholders across the state to address the housing supply shortage that we have.
Now, when they've done those appropriations, are those appropriations for developers, for homeowners, for builders, for landlords?
So the appropriation that we have received from the state mostly are for developers. So most of it is funding that's going to go directly into housing. We do have programs that impact individuals. So we have our single family mortgage product that comes along with a $10,000 down payment assistance. And we're working right now with the legislature to get that dollar amount increase. So right now, the maximum loan that MSHDA can provide for a single family home is $224,000. And we want to get that increase because, as you know, the cost of housing in Michigan is way more expensive than that. And we want to be able to meet the demand across the state in a much more equitable manner. We also have the My Hope program, which is an energy efficiency grant program that is available to everyone in the state up to 120% of area median income. That is a simple grant. It's a $25,000 grant to increase the energy efficiency of your home. So think mostly roofs and windows and energy efficient mechanical systems within a home. So we have that going right now. We still have funding available for that program, and that is statewide. Some of our other programs are really geared towards incentivizing the development of additional units. So at MSHDA, one of our larger programs is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which provides funding for rental, for multifamily rental. But in the last year, the state has funded our Housing Community Development Fund with $50 million a year. So we're excited about that. And those funds, coupled with the community development block grant dollars, which just came back to MSHDA this year, we're going to use those for smaller projects throughout the state. And those can be for homeowner or rental, new construction, rehabilitation. whatever the community needs, we can use those funds to help subsidize. Deena, we created this statewide housing plan that was approved about 18 months ago now. And as a result of that statewide housing plan, we've created 15 regions across the state, regional housing partnerships, which have taken that statewide housing plan and really kind of dug into that plan and pulled out goals of that statewide plan that most align with the needs and the values and the priorities of each region, and created regional housing plans. And we want to use that 50 million of community of the housing community development fund, as well as the 30 million for community development block grant dollars, and help regions implement those plans. So we're excited. We think in March, probably towards the end of March, those applications will come out, and it's going to be a very basic program. So in the past, we've had programs at MSHDA that are very specific. Like if you want to create modular housing, you can apply for this funds. If you want to, do accessible housing, you can apply for this fund. We're kind of scrapping that, and we're trying to think about things in a different way in our agency. And so this new program will basically just say, tell us what you want. Tell us what is your needs. So you don't have to fit into a specific program. We're going to try to make our funds just match the needs of the communities.
I got to tell you, that's so refreshing, because when I talk to different members, it's like, we don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Where do we go? What is specifically do I need to apply for? And applying for grants and monies like that is always, complicated.
Yeah.
But this is fantastic. So those regional groups that are doing the regional housing plan, implementing from, your state housing plan, how have they interacted with the different levels of government and community to develop those? Are they totally part of MSHDA, or they just took the ball and ran with it?
Yeah. So they're not part of MSHDA. They're really, each of the regions selected their own leaders, whoever was going to lead those regions. Sometimes they're local governments that are leading. Sometimes they're nonprofits. Sometimes they're a combination. So some regions will have 2 or 3 leaders kind of co-leading the initiative. But the whole idea is to bring more voices to the table, right? So certainly governments at every level should be involved in their regional housing partnerships, bringing their voices and their needs to the development of those plans, because that's really how we're going to fund housing projects throughout the state. So they really do need to be involved if they care about the development of housing in their area.
So when you're talking about the delivery of funds to really help with housing in different areas, how do you weigh those decisions? Is it based on, sort of number of units that are going to be established? Is there sort of a certain amount you're setting aside for more rural areas? Is it,
That's a
what
great
kind of
question.
income base are we looking at? Like,
Yeah.
how do you rate all that? That seems
Yeah.
good.
So we, number one, try to use data, right? We try to make it our allocations as objective as possible, right? And so first of all, we've kind of taken this pot of money that we have, and we've used a couple, I shouldn't say couple, it's probably like 8 or 9 different data points, and created a formula that helps us decide how much money is targeted to be allocated in each of the 15 regions based on those data points, which are mostly, population growth, looking at the economics and the demographic information in each of those regions. So we have an allocation plan right now that has been shared with the 15 regions. And then when those applications come in for each regions, we rank them, and we really look at number one, are they meeting a need in that region that we have identified with data is a need, which is pretty liberal right now because we're at such a housing shortage that really everywhere needs everything. But we also are looking at the regional housing partnerships and ensuring that those applications that come in are aligned with the priorities within those regional housing partnerships. So we look at the capacity of the organization and their ability to get the project completed. And also we look at how are they leveraging other funds on the project as well. So we kind of look at a few of those different criteria when we're scoring each of the project applications.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, yeah, I have another question. Is it that we're really trying to move to more multi-unit housing facilities as opposed to single-family homes, or is that again geographically different?
I think every region's different, every community is different. They have their own values, right? Like what they value for their community and what makes their community unique in our state. However, we are looking at how do we help for a more denser housing infrastructure. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean it has to be multifamily. It could just be smaller lot sizes. It could be duplexes, fourplexes, or it could be multifamily. We do know that we need a lot more housing and we don't have a lot more land, right? And so we need to be, I think, smarter about how we develop housing. It's more cost effective if the housing is dense. We also have to look at housing size. Do we all need a 3,500 square foot home, or is the demand now for a smaller footprint, which I think it is. um, and we're also, it's better for the environment. So we do want communities to not necessarily think they should do the same old thing when it comes to housing development, but look at their land use policies and their zoning, and should we make changes there, to look at a denser housing strategy.
I mean, yeah, I can see where it totally makes sense. And then in other areas, it wouldn't make any sense at all. Just very smaller downtown areas or smaller,
Right.
um, footprints for towns, it might not. But um, I had another question on that. Now I lost it. Oh, no, I was just going to make a comment. It's also a lot about infrastructure because
Yeah.
you've got to make sure, that you've got the utilities necessary, to provide for those houses. So, that in that way I can understand population density.
We are, yeah. I mean, I think especially in our rural areas, the infrastructure isn't always where the folks really want to develop the housing.
Mhm.
So if you're having to put in all new infrastructure, it's much more expensive than building in the built environment already. Now, I don't think we're going to meet demand just in the built environment. We're going to have to do some construction where there hasn't been housing, but it shouldn't be our first choice, right? Our first
Yeah.
choice should always be built environment because it's better. It's better for the environment. It's more cost effective. All of those things.
So what's coming up now? Do you have more, plans for legislation, different programs that you're going to start working on in the legislature this year?
Yeah, we have a couple new programs that we just rolled out. We have a Tribal Nations Housing Development Assistance Program, which is really kind of looking at our 12 federally recognized tribes in our state and their housing needs and getting them some additional assistance and housing subsidy to meet that specific population needs. Um, we are looking at a couple of legislative efforts this year. One I mentioned was getting the increase in our single family mortgage product, which is hugely important. Um, we have a Senate Bill 293 that we're pushing very hard at getting through. It's been passed by the Senate. It's kind of stuck in the House. That bill simply allows us to use the housing community development funds, that 50 million I spoke about earlier, in a much more flexible way. Um, because of the housing crisis, you know, we need to subsidize housing at a much higher income level than we have in the past. So, in the past, most of the housing we've developed has been for families 60% and below. We have one source that goes up to 80, but primarily it's been 60% and below. But we see the need goes up to 120. And so that legislation is really allowing us to use that 50 million to go up to 120% of area median income so that we can make sure that our teachers have housing throughout the state, and other folks in the middle income, our workforce. We need to make sure that we have housing for our workforce. And then we have a new piece of legislation that we're hoping to get introduced relatively soon, and that's the Michigan Homeownership Reinvestment Act. And that should generate about $200 million a year for homeownership. The cost to build a new single family home in Michigan right now averages about $375,000. And that's for a 1,200 square foot home, right? So we're not talking the McMansions of our state, but just like an average home. Only 1 million of our 4 million households in Michigan can afford that, right? And so we need to really find a source of subsidy so that we can provide homeownership opportunities to many more Michiganders in our state than just a third. So this new program would generate about $200 million a year, which we would use to incentivize the development of new for sale units or the rehabilitation of for sale units, as well as increase our down payment assistance program throughout the state. It's going to be a tough battle for that one. It's a new program, and anytime you're trying to get a new program passed that requires additional revenue, it's a heavy lift. I think we're up for it. I think we need it in our state. You know, we're trying to grow our population. We need people to plant roots. Well, you don't plant roots any better than buying a house, right? But we have to make that affordable. In our state, we have a fairly high homeownership rate right now, about 70%, which people will say, well, it's easy in our state. Well, it's not easy. It's because people bought their homes a long time ago and our population is fairly old, right? And so if you bought a house when it was affordable 15, 20, 30 years ago, and you stayed in that house, you know, that's how we have such a high homeownership rate. When you look at people who are trying to become first-time home buyers, it's really hard for them to afford the price points that are within our state right now.
That's kind of tragic. So now let's transition a little bit into what can our counties do to help you, to help with those regional
housing partnerships and plans.
Yes.
And I think number one is get involved in your regional housing partnership. Make sure you have somebody from the county involved in those and making sure that the county's needs and priorities are reflected in those regional plans. We have seen some counties, which I love, and I think, you know, I met with Charlevoix County late last year, and they're thinking about doing countywide zoning, which I love the idea. Counties often have more capacity than some of our smaller local governments, especially in our rural areas of our state, and having them kind of become involved in a leader and looking at doing countywide zoning to create and allow for auxiliary housing units or denser housing development. I think it's important. Certainly looking at excess land, you know, counties, the county treasurer leads the foreclosure, tax foreclosure process in our state. You know, often they might foreclose on excess land, whether they have a state or a county land bank or not, or they're working with the state land bank, really making that land available for housing development, I think is important. And working at developing ideas of where housing can be developed and sharing that with developers to entice them to come into their counties and do housing development is really where I see county leadership can be very impactful when we're looking at housing development.
Diligently taking notes, so thank you. Not that I can't go back and watch this, but I am taking notes.
And I think it's important for counties to know that our doors are open, right? If you have an idea, if you have an issue, you don't have to scan through MSHDA's programs and figure out what program might work best. Just come to us. We'll sit down, we'll meet with you, we'll help identify how we can help. We can help connect developers to counties that want housing, and really try to help build that capacity to get the housing built.
I think all of this is absolutely fantastic, Amy. I appreciate your time today. Any last words before we wrap up and get this all published and get our commissioners thinking?
I think it is just, you know, MSHDA's here to help. would be my final word. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to talk about housing.
Absolutely, Amy, it was extremely informative. And, I anticipate another phone call here soon to have you come and talk to us some more. So thank
Sounds
you
good.
very, very much. Anything we can do to help, let us know.
And likewise, have a
All
great
right.
day.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.